Universal sues Nintendo over Donkey Kong. Spielberg signs with Atari. And Tron disappoints. These stories and many, many more on this episode of the Video Game Newsroom Time Machine.
I've been waiting a long time for a chance to say this. Stop the presses.
Requiescat in pace.
Makes him crazy, man. What is a man?
It's me, Mario.
What a mess.
Get over here!
Please save me.
Welcome back to the Video Game Newsroom Time Machine, the show where we travel back in time to find out what was making headlines in the home computer and video game industries of yesteryear. Today we're going to be traveling back 40 years to July of 1982. I'm your host, Carl, and I'm joined again by everybody's favorite co-host, Mads. Welcome back, Mads.
Thanks, Carl. Not sure about the whole everybody's favorite, because I just heard you call Wouter everybody's favorite co-host well, actually this morning while I was mowing the lawn. I was listening to you guys, so I'm not convinced.
It's one of those wonderful phrases that will apply to enough of a percentage of our listeners as to be legally acceptable as a true statement.
There goes the lawyer. Hey?
I still got it, baby. Still got it.
Well, I'm glad to be back.
Oh, I'm glad to have you back, especially for today's episode, because no co-host can keep me somewhat on point and on schedule like you can.
I shall do my very best.
And today, well, our count up to the crash is gone into overdrive.
Yes.
We have a metric ton of stuff to get through, but of course we have to do the obligatory banter before that. So please, Matt, regale us with the tales of what is happening at far more popular podcasts.
So what is happening? Man, it's just lots and lots of heat, isn't it? I mean, everything is melting here. So we haven't actually been doing a lot. We've had to postpone recording because Dean's shed at the Retro Asylum, for example, it's a garden shed where he has all his stuff and where he needs to go to record. It's so hot that he couldn't even be in there and do any recording. Oh, wow. So we've been on a not a complete hiatus, but we haven't been churning out so many episodes as we usually do these past 2 months. So
yeah, I was wondering what the delay was. It just seemed to be a lack of stuff. But you guys just did an interview recently, right?
We did
an interview episode. Or maybe I was going through the archives and I got something out of order. This is very possible. The Sega Power interview?
Oh yes, we did that recently. That's not too long ago. And we did just release the episode on Devil May Cry, a game which I am really, really bad at. So listen to that episode if you want to hear me whine about stuff being too hard.
See, this is where you really need to be recording this and add it as a Patreon exclusive, because that's where the real bonus content for the supporters comes in.
Yeah, could be. Now, but apart from that, personally, I've been playing this past 2 days. I think it's a 10-year-old game called VVVVVV, I guess.
Oh yeah.
Oh, I'm loving it. I just actually right before we started recording, there was this challenge. In that game, there are 20 little trinkets you can pick up that are just extras. You don't need them, but they are always hard to get at. And I found this one that was in a position or at a screen that was called Doing Things the Hard Way. And I must have tried, I'd like to say about 200 times before it actually clicked, and I actually did it. And I've seldomly felt so proud of a gaming achievement. So great game. I really love that.
If I remember correctly, it's something similar to Super Meat Boy, but using ASCII-like characters.
No, it is. No, it's something similar to Super Meat Boy in that you die all the time, and then there are numerous checkpoints, so you're never thrown back more than a few seconds. And it's really, really tough platforming. But it's a platformer where you don't have a jump. you can switch gravity. So when you're standing on a platform and you press the one button that you use in this game, you switch gravity so that you'll fly up or fall down. And you can't do it midair. You need to be standing on a platform to do this switch gravity thing. And that's how you need to progress through the levels. And it makes them for some really, really interesting level design. I'm totally in awe of this game. Actually, the design of this game is really nice.
Cool. Yeah, I remember playing it so briefly years and years ago, and yeah, I guess at the time it just did not. The frustration factor was a little too much for my very limited sensibilities.
Yeah, you definitely need to be in the mood for throwing yourself 100 times at the same problem and just getting that little bit further every time.
Yeah, that's not me, unfortunately. But I'm happy for you. You keep it up. Good job. And the V's represent spikes, right? That's why it's called VVVVV.
I guess they do. Makes sense. Never even dawned on me, but yeah, makes sense.
Yeah, that's why you can. Yeah. Okay. Very cool. Now, since we have so much to do, let's jump right into it today. First off, of course, everybody remember that when we're talking about July of 1982, we're always using publications dated July of 1982, so a lot of the stories happened before that date, and it's just a convention, so we have some semblance of a chronological order for the series. So please, no letters. Second, also remember you can support us on Patreon, and for $1 a month you get early access to our interview episodes and also get a video version of our next segment, the 7 Minutes in Heaven, where our intrepid co-host will have to play a game that was reviewed in a publication dated July of 1982 that they have never played before. And we had a few high-profile candidates. We had arcade games like Tron, Dig Dug, and Robotron, as well as some interesting little tidbits for home computers like Alibaba and the 40 Thieves and Trader. But we went with a lesser-known arcade game by Exidy known as Pepper 2. So, Mads, are you ready to get peppered, or whatever that means?
Indeed.
Okay, then have at it. Welcome back, Mads, from your 7 Minutes in Heaven. So, for the uninitiated, how would you describe Pepper 2?
So it's like a single screen game in the vein of Pac-Man or Kicks, kind of like a hybrid of the two, because you don't need to swallow a lot of pellets and remove the maze like that. You need to close down areas of the maze. The maze is made out of zippers, and you need to close all of the zippers. And once you've closed an area that's like self-contained, it becomes colored, and the little monsters that are moving around in the maze as well won't open the zippers again after you. And doing that, moving through all of the different hallways of the maze, you need to clear the screen. And the funny thing is that you can actually enter the second, third, and fourth maze initially from the game. I mean, you are in the first maze, and you can just run to north, for example, to the exit up there, and you'll get into the second or maybe third or maybe fourth maze, and you can run south and east as well. And then you can just go directly to the harder levels if you want, and do the levels in any order you want, because they are all in play at the same time. So it remembers, if I go into maze 3 and then back into maze 1, it remembers the work I've done in maze 1. So it's kind of a huge game from the get-go.
Yeah, and that is a pretty impressive for the time. The game mechanics seemed very impressive with the idea of the zippers closing, the monsters running around, and you said this in the video version that the Patreons can watch. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. That it does feel like a mix of Kicks and Pac-Man. It's like those two games came together. Now, graphically, it does feel, though, a little bit behind the times.
Oh, very much so. I mean, your little main sprite is a single-colored sprite, and you can see through him, actually, as he walks around the environment. So it kind of looks... I'm trying to not make all of the UK listeners too angry, but it looks a bit like a ZX Spectrum game in some ways.
Yeah, just a little bit less color clash.
Yes, less color clash, but the same garish color, like a color palette, and quite few colors to choose from.
Yeah, I mean, it felt to me very, very much like CGA, because at certain points when you got certain power-ups, it would change the palette around, but it always seemed to be stuck in a 4 or 5 color palette.
Yeah, that's true, actually.
Yeah, and the colors were very CGA-esque. I mean, red, green, yellow type of things.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I mean, it looked like a fun game, though. You were having a good time with it.
Yeah, I was indeed. I managed to clear the first mage just when the 7 minutes finished, and that was good fun. The only problem I had with the game was that the controls were quite finicky, so you really had to be careful what you pressed, because he was moving. Your little character moves. When you press right once, he'll move to the next dot. They're like these, I guess where the intersections of the roads are, and then the maze. He moves to the next intersection, and he does that quite quickly. And sometimes you need to change your mind in the middle of that because you want to avoid a ghost. And I mean, it becomes quite finicky because he moves so fast, and just one little tap to the right kills you because you run into a ghost, or as you will see in the video version, you'll run out of the screen and into one of the other mazes. I did that a lot of times when I didn't mean to. So the controls could be tight, just slightly tighter, but apart from that, it's a really good game. It's a nice mechanic.
Yeah, and it's kind of weird that I can find no reference to a Pepper 1.
Yeah, that is weird.
Original Pepper game. So, and also, we mused about the possible imagery that is being suggested here with the zippers, because the ad campaign for this, and I'll put a link to this in the show notes, the flyer, has the most 80s teenage girl imaginable with the hip hugger jeans and the sweater tied around her neck and the hair that literally must have been blown dry with an inch of falling off of her head, playing the game. And there's a little angel character that is presumably what you're controlling, and a little devil character on her shoulders, and she's looking very flummoxed. And so you can build any kind of analogy you want for a game about a teenage girl and a little angel's closing zippers and locking them away for good. So, not going to say what I think is going on there, but I'm just saying that there's somebody had a thought. So, okay. Recommendation? Yes, no, should be played, should not be played?
So this isn't a classic by any stretch, but it's definitely a game that you should just try, because it's good fun. And if you do like Pac-Man and Kicks, you'll probably like this as well. And just spend 5 or 7 minutes, and you'll get more used to the controls and actually get somewhere. So definitely recommend trying it.
Cool, awesome. Then before we can turn on the time machine, we have one more order of business, and that's to check in with our good friend Ethan in the Department of Corrections to find out what I got wrong in our last 40-year jump.
Surely nothing.
Oh, no, not at all. I mean, it's going to be like last time, one little side thing.
Yeah.
No, it's not. Okay.
Hello, this is a prepaid collect call from
the Department of Corrections.
This call is subject to recording and monitoring. To accept charges, press 1. You may start the conversation now.
Welcome back, Ethan. Before the, the punishment that is the Department of Corrections mistakes for June of 1982. We have
No, Carl. First, we gotta go forward this time because the thing of the comment relates to the first thing here.
Oh, okay.
So we gotta mix things up because you mixed it up that badly. So we gotta jump forward and then we'll come back for the comment. The main thing, as the game that you played for 7 minutes in heaven was Naughty Boy, and you very emphatically stated Naughty Boy was put out by the company Centauri. And no, it was not. In fact, the reason I know it is not because it was a Cinematronics game, and I may know a thing or two about Cinematronics.
This is true. Other than Mogwai, that is the company you know best.
Yes, continue to go back to that one. So the story you told is also slightly off. The thing was that there was a gray import version of Naughty Boy at a show that Cinematronics was also debuting Naughty Boy at. And they went into a whole big legal rigmarole over this. The Naughty Boy and Jack the Giant Killer as well situation is a very confused one. But indeed, Naughty Boy was put out in the US by Cinematronics.
Gotcha. And, okay, so, got that wrong.
Now we can go back, get out our little sticky sticks, and get ready for the Department of Corrections. First of all, the Mads! Mads, you mentioned that the idea of Naughty Boy having this throwing mechanism, you hold down the button and you're able to throw further. I think that's what it is. An interesting story about that, another thing that will be in the book. That particular method was actually picked up by one of the guys who was at Cinematronics at the time, a guy named Bob Skinner. And he later implemented that into a beat-em-up game that he made at Cinematronics called Brute Force. So it was an influential mechanic in that sense. And we've seen it sometimes in the modern day. Holding down a button gives you a different result than just tapping the button. I think it's a pretty good solution to not having a billion buttons.
As a person who had to play most of his games on a Commodore Amiga with only one fire button, I can tell you that mechanic has come into play many, 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 many times.
Indeed-a-lady. Okay, let's get back to our list. Okay. First off, you were also on the Naughty Boy situation. We just can't escape Naughty Boy. You were saying that in this time there was this big delay between US and Japan, and after this period, it just didn't exist, and that is absolutely not correct. Even a game like Street Fighter II didn't come to the US for several months until it had already been in Japan. And in console realm, this continued to be the predominant trend up until the PS2. There was always a delayed launch between Japan and the US for many decades, way beyond the early 80s.
No, and the delay in the consoles was obvious. I just meant that the delay in the arcades was maybe a couple of months, which really, granted, arcade games didn't really have that long of a lifespan, but still, it wasn't the 1 to 2 years that you might expect for some console games.
True enough, though I'm sure you can find a few isolated examples.
Oh, I'm sure. And I really go back here, Jim Chocano, I tried to ask him about the whole delay issue, and he was like, we didn't really care. That was his
well, if there was
reaction.
Product, there was product. And,
exactly.
as long as there was domestic product to that could make money, it didn't really matter.
Exactly, and the whole situation with the great imports and so forth, it's still going to be there, and then we get the whole great import law in 92, the parallels as they call them. But yeah, I don't think it was as big. It didn't have as big an impact on the U.S. market post crash. But we'll see how the news reports shake out in the coming years.
And to the next point, going 200 years back to the Babbage system. You posed the question that could not be answered of whether or not the Babbage system was like a full computer, and it wasn't. There was kind of this broad idea that it might have different applications, but what Babbage came up with was not Turing complete in the sense that we would think of it. It could do math. And there was kind of this broad idea that you could extrapolate math into other things, like Ada Lovelace's, concept of the program and whatnot. And Babbage had the idea of doing tic-tac-toe on the system, but it was not a Turing complete solution. It was just the idea of a computational device.
Gotcha. Makes sense.
And of course, computers in themselves were just people who computed.
Exactly, as I've run into in many 1940s jumps.
Indeed. Next up, Space War! With an exclamation point. Never forget the exclamation point. I think you said it had a planet in the middle or a black hole. No, it is a star, specifically. A star.
Well, no, I couldn't remember if there was a star in that iteration of the game or... No, I couldn't remember if Computer Space had it. I knew Space War had it, but I didn't know if Computer Space had it.
I think you were saying that it was a black hole or something, but no, Computer Space does not as well.
But that was my question. Because I knew the original main.
Are you attempting to say that the Department of Corrections is correcting something that didn't need to be corrected?
I'm saying that the Department of Corrections wrote their notes like 2 months ago and may not quite remember what the context was.
And you spoke this over 2 months ago, so maybe you don't know what the context was.
Oh, wow. This is true, and there's only one way to find out, which neither one of us will engage in, which is to go back and re-listen to it. Okay.
Okay, next one. Forward to 1972. You were confused about the Syzygy situation. So, Atari acquired the stock of Syzygy when it was created. Syzygy ceased to exist. But Atari was using Syzygy as their business name. They were Atari DBA Syzygy.
Yeah. They still had contracts running under the name Syzygy at that point, didn't they?
There was no formal entity called Syzygy. There was a partnership, but it was never incorporated or anything. So
yeah.
They continued to use the letterhead of Syzygy at least to mid-1973. It might go a little bit beyond that. I can't remember what's the latest document that we have for that. But they would use Syzygy as the top heading rather than Atari.
Gotcha.
So that's the Syzygy situation.
Cool.
Also on early Atari, their first employee was not Al Alcorn. Their first employee was Cynthia Villanueva, who was serving as the secretary.
Gotcha.
So put that one in your pipe and smoke it.
Makes perfect sense. There's gotta have somebody keeping track of the letterhead. Now,
well, mainly what she did was answer phones. But anyways, next part is also on early Atari and Pong and the situation with Bally. So this is something we pruned from the court documents around the Magnavox case. So Bally did not necessarily need to turn down Pong because they never considered Pong as what was promised to them in the contract that you read. They say this very explicitly in their deposition. That they were like, yeah, we didn't take it, but that didn't mean we were turning down the thing, and therefore he could break the contract and go off and do his own thing.
Okay, so was there legal action from Bally against Atari for breach of contract?
No, there was never that. Even though they were supposed to give them a game in like October 72. The obligations were before the end of 72. They did not fulfill that, but they made Pong, they started manufacturing their thing, and then Bally licensed Space Race, I think in January 70, no, I think it was February 72. So that gap, they didn't care. They did not take legal action against Atari or threaten them, as far as we can tell in any way, for the fact that they missed that deadline. Probably because they knew it would be a good idea to have a good relationship with Atari. The deal, they also licensed Pong, but that was not a fulfillment of their contract.
Gotcha. Okay.
Very complicated stuff, but it is actually very important because there is basically this, the story that Atari tricked Bally to not take Pong. But they didn't need to. Bally didn't consider it part of the contract.
So, Bally's Pong variants were actually licensed from Atari.
Winner was. Just Winner. The others were not. Winner is Pong, built by Bally.
Gotcha. Interesting.
I think that contract was January 73 as well. We have these details, and I love having these details, but it only comes up because it was in a court document.
Sounds perfectly valid to me.
Okay.
Court documents are good.
Next, we must give a sad little notice of Mr. Bernie Stolar, who of course passed away very recently. And you mentioned on the thing that, his name was on the poster as one of the people involved with this game, Thief, that you were talking about. He did do some work on games before Thief. That was not the first game he did with Pacific Novelty. I think there was some confusion on that.
I just couldn't remember. I hadn't seen his name before that, so I couldn't answer the question as to whether or not that was the first game he worked on. But it was just the first time.
And whether or not they worked on it, big air quotes in here, is its own little mystery. I believe that Pacific Novelty's games, most of them were done in the U.S., but we don't really know who did them.
Gotcha. Yeah, I think he's listed either as a producer or something of that nature. I mean, they're not claiming he was a programmer or anything on it.
Right. But, if you had creative input and it was taken, I think you can get a little bit of credit there. But
of course.
That's its own thing. Of course, Electronic Arts says it invented the producer, but Bernie Stolar was the first video game producer. Right there. Just like that.
Dig it.
Next. What's that? You dig it?
I dig it.
Okay.
Can you dig it? Okay. Not gonna do that.
Next. Vectrex. You said the Vectrex controllers click in the front, implying that they get stuck by something on there, and they don't. They just slide into the front.
Gotcha.
And it's a little bit of an odd design, but the Vectrex controllers, even though they are boxes, they are not terribly awful to handle.
My few experiences with them have been less than positive. Now, granted, then they're not the utter disaster that the
blah 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 blah.
Get on out of here. Those little sticks on top.
Nah. Get a little on out of here. Next, also on Vectrex, GCE, General Consumer Electronics, was made out of people who had worked at Mattel Electronics. Principally, the two people who were the designated head at the beginning of Mattel Electronics, Ed Krakauer and Jeff Rockless. Mainly Ed Krakauer.
Oh, okay. And did they try to sell the product first to Mattel and then move it over to Parker Brothers?
As far as I know, no, and also not Parker Brothers.
No, Milton Bradley, right.
Yeah.
Milton Bradley.
Yeah. Because Mattel had their own electronic toys thing going on. The main thing that they were doing was the Game Watch. That was why the company was created. They wanted to do the game time game watches.
Gotcha.
The Vectrex fell into their lap because Smith Engineering did it for them. Okay. Now, before Carl falls asleep, next one, also on handhelds. Yeah, you were saying you wanted the Black Knight handheld, and you said that you weren't sure if there were other pinball LED handhelds. There were.
Well, this wasn't for a handheld. This would have been for, what was the name of that weird tabletop device with the that used a similar mirror switching technique.
Adventure Vision?
Yeah, exactly.
Oh.
Yeah, it was a Black Knight pinball game for that device. That I would have liked to see.
But there were other pinball handhelds. I think that was the general question. So there you go.
Cool.
Another handheld note. Little Professor premiered way before 1982. It's a 1970s thing.
Oh, really? Okay, cool. Yeah, it was, I think, a New York Times article or somebody mentioned it, and like some new thing, and I guess it was probably just the journalists not knowing what the hell they were talking about.
I'm sure they had a new version on the thing, just like, you know, you can say the version of Simon is new, even though it's the same old game, you know.
Very true. Cosmetic.
Last up. Sierra did not make any cartridges for the VCS. I believe there was a license, particularly of their Pac-Man style game, but they did not themselves get into the VCS market. The cartridge market they got into was the VIC-20 mostly, and the TI-90.
Gotcha. Yeah, that was my big question because the games appeared under the Tiger Electronics VCS label, whatever it was now. But, okay, that makes a lot more sense. And I wasn't sure if it was one of those deals similar to what Fox had going with
Sirius Software,
where Sirius had to cover the cost of manufacturing.
No, Sierra did not get in with the consoles like that. But I do believe they licensed a thing or two, but they never made them.
Yeah, they clearly licensed Jawbreaker and a couple of others. So, as ports to the VCS.
Yeah. But they didn't do it themselves. They didn't get burned that bad, and if they had done it, they probably would have died.
This is true. Well, they were close to death anyway.
Yeah, I know.
They had to lay everybody off, and thanks to King's Quest, they survived. But that sweet IBM dev money.
Oh, the PC Junior. That'll be fun to cover. But that's all we have for now.
To that.
This is the Department of Correction for June 1982. We'll see you next time in June 1992.
Ethan, as always, thank you for your service.
So you're telling me Atari didn't bother actually getting new paper printed, new letterhead? They just went with their old syzygy stock that they probably took a few years to use?
I don't know if it was a few years, but it's very likely they either already had it there or they still had contracts running under the syzygy name, so it just made more sense to keep it going.
Yeah, okay.
Now, get your hands on an original copy of that, paperwork. That would be fun.
Yes.
Have that original letterhead. That would be nice little collector's item. But well.
Definitely.
Okay, so now that we've got that out of the way, let's turn on the time machine and go back 40 years to July of 1982.
Knowledge is 1982. Electronic video games. Entertainment retail sales have been generally lackluster. There is so much money to be made.
Welcome back to July of 1982. And I'm just going to say this right up front, everybody. It's count up to the crash. We're just adding more and more fuel to the fire that will be the video game crash. And so that's just kind of the big overall scheme of today's stuff. Well, there's a lot of stories, and some of the transitions may be harder to make. It's just because I'm just throwing out so much stuff, and there was so much that I left out. So, Mads, what's our first story?
U.S. Army enlists Atari.
The U.S. Army has enlisted Atari to make a modified version of their Battlezone game to train soldiers how to operate the M2 personnel transport vehicle. They will earn points for shooting down Warsaw-packed vehicles while having to hear the 1812 overture if they hit a friendly vehicle.
I wonder if this was ever actually made.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, okay.
The ROM is out there.
Bespoke arcade machine with the, I guess, controls that would resemble closely enough what they would have in that M2.
I don't actually think that they changed the controls. This is something I'd have to look up, but it was basically just a ROM hack. I mean, Battlezone already had tank controls,
it did,
and they're not simulating a bunch of different cannons or anything. It's just the one cannon. So, the software does get updated for this. This thing does happen. This is a report coming out of the New York Times. I mean, it's not one of those weird, obscure things. But it is interesting because it shows the presence of these arcade games, and it also kind of shows the fact, as we've talked about a few times on the show, military simulators and so forth, are little more than games when you really want to break it down.
Yeah.
And, this is, for military standards, super cheap hardware to do these games.
Yeah. Definitely.
So why not?
Okay. Well, on to the next piece of news then. So we've got lots and lots to cover. Saxon commercial.
Aired from June 22nd to July 3rd in the market area from Santa Barbara down to San Diego, California. An actual television ad for the Zaxxon arcade game aired 93 times. Now, have you ever seen this ad, Mads?
No, never.
Okay, it basically starts off with a guy playing the game, and it shows a quick little bit of the actual game footage, but then it has CGI rendered versions of a fly-through of a Zaxxon level.
Nice.
And it's pretty kick-ass.
Okay.
And I'll put a link to it in the show notes. And then at the very end, you get this big Sega logo.
Yeah.
And this is the key. That I actually found a couple of articles about this in the arcade trades. And one of the things that they wanted to achieve with this ad, and the ad costs them a lot of money. It's not a cheap ad to put together. But one of the main goals was to cement the Sega brand. They're pushing the Sega brand. Now remember, it's being manufactured at Sega Gremlin. Gremlin was a company that existed before it was acquired by Sega. But here they're pushing the Sega brand name. Now, whether or not Sega's thinking already bigger, thinking beyond just the arcades. Remember, Sega already has their robot-themed pizza arcade that we talked about already on the show months ago. They may or may not be thinking about a console.
Mm-hmm.
They have had conversations with Coleco already. So the idea of getting Sega cemented as a brand name is definitely playing a role here.
Yeah. Well, it makes sense, but very, very early to be having TV commercials for stuff like that, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. I mean, we've talked about how astonishing I found magazine ads for arcade games in non-trade publications. I'm not sure if this is the very first arcade game TV commercial. It may actually be. It's one of those things where it's hard to imagine how big the industry is at this moment, how much of a presence it has in the public consciousness.
Yeah.
And again, I mean, this is them trying to establish, hey, we're the only ones with a 3D game. Granted, Battlezone already came out. That was actual 3D. This is just isometric.
Yeah, isometric shooter for our listeners who haven't played it.
Yeah, but it's an isometric shooter where you can't, where you can change the height, so the altitude that you're flying at. Yep. Something Battlezone really didn't have. You were still just on a two-dimensional plane in Battlezone.
Yeah.
So it is interesting. I don't know how much sense it actually made to produce this, as we're going to see, but it is an interesting event. Let's put it that way.
Definitely. And speaking of Sega Gremlin opens a new factory.
With the arcade market still hot, Sega Gremlin have consolidated their fragmented manufacturing operations into a new 120... Got an airplane flying by?
Nope, somebody playing with motorcycles outside, it seems.
Okay.
I think they just left, so.
Okay, that's
Hopefully.
not a problem. With the arcade market still hot, Sega Gremlin have consolidated their fragmented manufacturing operations into a new 125,000 square foot facility outside of San Diego and will be able to produce 500 machines a day.
Saxon machines. It has to be.
Saxon machines at this point are still being produced in their old facilities, but this will be one of the thought processes here. Unfortunately, this month will also see Sega Gremlin, for the first time, shutting down their production line in the summer due to insufficient demand.
Yeah.
And now that's a big deal because while a lot of manufacturers have always had to shut down in the summer, Sega Gremlin has never had to do that.
Okay.
And Zaxxon is, it's a phenomenal game. It's super high end. The fact that they suddenly have inventory to get rid of, remember, and if you've listened to my interview with Mr. Trucano, he was one of the big operators at the time. You ordered your games early in the year because summertime was the big time.
Yeah.
So if you're still left with games, something either went wrong with your prediction of how popular the game was going to be, the operators didn't buy in, or you may just have produced more than the market could handle.
Yeah.
And some might argue that this is like the first big moment where this is the beginning of the crash of the arcade. This moment when Sega, they just opened up this new facility, but already they don't really need that extra capacity. So we may be seeing a cooling of the market.
Yeah, already. Okay, but something that isn't cooling down is Mrs. Pac-Man. Miss Pac-Man set to match Pac-Man.
In an industry first, a sequel game looks to match its predecessor's production run as an arcade cabinet. Ms. Pac-Man has just hit 91,000 units in just 6 months, while Pac-Man managed 95,000 in 15 months.
Yeah. Seems pretty certain that it will reach that goal then.
Yeah. Now, Midway does say that demand is beginning to wane, but they've got over 80 licensees making merch, and the cartoon is set to premiere in the fall. So, who knows how high demand could still get. And we're not counting, obviously, the reissues later on with Galaxian and stuff in the late 90s, early 2000s, or whenever that was.
But Pac-Mania was definitely still a thing.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Like I said, the cartoon hasn't hit yet. That's going to bring them out. And, of course, Miss Pac-Man's also going to appear on the VCS.
Yeah.
And going to sell fairly well. And then, of course, we're also going to get ports to the home computer systems.
Yeah.
So it's not all dire yet.
Nope. And more Namco news, because Bally and Atari both buy into Namco.
Namco, maker of games such as Pac-Man, Galaga, and Dig Dug, has seen two of the biggest players in the U.S. industry and two of their licensees buy equity shares in the company, no doubt hoping to help them secure rights to future Namco arcade creations.
So Atari, as you just mentioned, get to release Pac-Man, at least on this, Galaga as well for the VCSs. Isn't that right? Or
Bally was releasing Pac-Man in the arcades. Atari had the home rights.
Yeah.
And both of them have now bought into Namco because, and this is a phenomenon that we've talked about a few times now, more and more of the Japanese manufacturers are beginning to establish American subsidiaries for their own distribution, American production facilities for their own distribution in North America. Sega is a good example of that. And the idea that these very innovative, really cool Japanese games are not going to be available for licensing anymore is starting to spook a lot of the American manufacturers. Because we're seeing, Donkey Kong, Dig Dug, Zaxxon, a lot of the technologically advanced, a lot of the gameplay refined titles that are coming are all coming out of Japan suddenly.
Yeah.
And, it's a question now, what's the cost benefit? If we can just license a really good game from Japan, we don't have to develop it at home. But, what happens when the Japanese company doesn't sell me the license anymore? And this is where we're starting to see this difficulty arise.
And what happens when the Japanese company wants to set up shop in the US themselves, like Nintendo, who seeks to expand their US operations?
Exactly. Thank you. I set that one up nicely. Due to the explosive demand for its arcade games, Nintendo is seeking to build its own manufacturing facilities. The proposed 4-building facility in Redmond, Washington, which would replace its current leased facilities in Tukwila, will, if Nintendo gets its way, be financed through a bond issued by the city of Redmond, which Nintendo would pay off. Nintendo says they hope this will get them a better interest rate than if they took the loan themselves.
So they're getting a bigger facility in Redmond, or?
They would be building one.
Okay.
And this is also going to be where they're housed. To this day, they're in this Redmond, Tukwila. This is all part of the Seattle area.
Yeah.
This is my old hunting grounds. And so what they want the city to do, they want the city to borrow the money. Or better said, the city will issue bonds to finance this, and Nintendo will buy those bonds, and this way Nintendo will be the ones who get a better interest rate by essentially borrowing the money from the city, if you will. And they're doing this, hey, do this, we'll bring high-tech industry to you in this hot arcade video game thing.
Yeah.
And that's how this is going down.
Okay, and that's all for creating arcade games?
Well, that's the thing. They already say in their press notice that the new facility will allow them to not just produce coin-op games, but expand into home video games and computers as well.
And saving the world, or at least the US, from after the crash, I guess.
Yeah. And it's interesting that they talk about it as computers.
Yes.
Obviously, the Famicom family computer had some expandability and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
And so if this press release is to be believed, it's very likely that Nintendo was on the fence as to which way to go at this point.
Yeah.
Because, so many people were talking about video game computer hybrids or computers being the future, et cetera, that they're leaving their options open. But we also know Nintendo has seen the ColecoVision at this point.
Yeah.
So, there's a lot of stuff going on here, but it's not unimaginable that they're already thinking about getting into the home market.
Yeah. They must have been working on the NES behind the scenes at this point.
Probably. I mean, it's going to be released in Japan in 83?
Yeah.
So, they're working on it already, and having a U.S. Location to launch it from just makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. So, next piece of news is that Coca-Cola buys Gottlieb.
The soft drink giant shareholders and those of Columbia, the movie studio, owners among others of venerable pinball maker Gottlieb, have agreed on the purchase worth over $775 million in cash and stock. Gottlieb has had some hits lately in pinball, but has yet to truly make its mark in video games.
So this is still people throwing money at video games because that is still what they think is the hot thing.
Yeah. Coca-Cola, and again, we've talked about this a little bit. This was this phenomenon in the 60s, 70s, and up until the very early 80s of the conglomerate.
Yes.
These companies that, the idea was if you have a foot in a dozen different industries, that if one industry goes down, you're still solid. Without, of course, considering the fact that different industries require different talents, and you're going to lose any ability to gain a synergy inside of the conglomerate if there's no overlap. So, yeah, this is basically going to be a shit show. And it's going to turn out very, very poorly for all parties involved, and Coca-Cola will spin all this stuff off rather quickly over the next couple of years.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. But, it's another sign of just lots of big money coming into the industry.
Yeah. So Universal sues over Donkey Kong.
Sticking with movie studios, Universal Studios has filed a suit seeking to stop Nintendo from, as they put it, infringing on their rights to the King Kong IP. Universal claims they became aware of the game after Coleco licensed the rights to home versions. Universal has demanded royalties from both companies, and while Coleco has paid up, Nintendo continues to refuse to do so.
So Coleco paid up, so they would have been scared by Universal's claims, but Nintendo's lawyers knew something that they didn't, or?
Nintendo's lawyers basically have always taken the position, screw you, Jack, we're not doing this. They fight virtually everything. The one thing that they probably paid up without too much fight, and I don't know the history on this, we're going to get to it. We're going to talk about related topic here in a little bit, was the Magnavox Odyssey stuff. I think they fought it for a little bit, but they did pay up there.
Yeah.
But in everything else, Nintendo fights, and they just fight, and they fight, and they fight. And they're just, they're just not going to stop until they stop. Granted, when one of the heads of your company is a lawyer, that's Howard Lincoln, it's probably one of the influences here. But yeah, it's going to turn out well for Nintendo because Universal is going to find out that they don't actually have the IP. Now, the original King Kong was from a studio called RKO. They also did Citizen Kane back in the day.
Yes.
And if you've ever watched Rocky Horror Picture Show,
yes.
The final scene when they're all possessed and doing the dance in the underwear, in the background, the radio microphone has an RKO symbol above it.
Yes.
To represent all the old movies.
Yeah.
So they, RKO and whoever owned the RKO rights at that point had licensed to them the ability to make a remake in the 70s.
Okay.
And that's also why you end up with the Universal theme parks having a King Kong ride.
Okay. But they had a limited license for just that.
Yeah, they couldn't license a video game.
Okay. Okay.
And also they probably would have lost because the similarities weren't really big enough to, it's not like you were attacking Donkey Kong with an airplane or something.
No, and it's not like Donkey Kong was the same size as King Kong at all. I mean, unless Mario is and Peach, but she wasn't called Peach, but Pauline at that point were huge as well.
Yeah, I mean the whole thing. Yeah, a gorilla climbing a building. Yeah, I guess, but Mighty Joe Young had also happened and stuff like this. Now, granted, I think there was also a lawsuit about that back in the day, but
okay.
It's just one of those things where Universal is going to find out the hard way that they cannot produce evidence of their claim to the IP.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Moving on and moving out of the arcade business, Showbiz and Pizza Time, reach a settlement.
Yeah, still the arcade business, but now it's the family entertainment arcade business.
Yes.
The long-standing dispute between Pizza Time Theater, home of Chuck E. Cheese, and Brock Hotel's Showbiz Pizza over Showbiz's termination of a co-development deal and subsequent creation of a there's
sorry about that
motorcycle. No problem. No problem. It's all good. It's summertime, people. Those are the sounds of summer. So, and the subsequent creation of a clearly copycat restaurant cum arcade cum animatronic music show concept that we originally reported on way back in an episode I haven't looked up yet, but we'll link to in the show notes, has finally been resolved. After a partial trial that saw the judge disallow several of Showbiz's defenses, a settlement was reached giving Chuck E. Cheese a lump sum of $750,000 and a percentage of Showbiz's income from its first 160 stores for 14 years. Showbiz currently operates 70 locations.
That sounds pretty bad for show business.
Yeah, and just as a reminder to everybody, when we talked about this originally, what had happened was that Pizza Time Theater wanted to start franchising. They cut a deal with Brock Hotels. It was a hotel chain, and also had run restaurants to basically become a franchisee. They got to see all the internal documents on Chuck E. Cheese and how it operated, and in the very last minute, they backed out of the deal and then immediately opened up a place that was essentially a carbon copy.
Yeah.
With new characters and stuff. But other than that, it was the same exact deal.
Sounds pretty shady.
Very shady. Now, in a couple of years, Chuck E. Cheese is going to hit some financial problems, and Showbiz is actually going to buy them up and replace all the Showbiz theaters over the next few years with Chuck E. Cheese's.
Okay.
So that is coming. But right now, Pizza Time Theater is going to get a nice little chunk of change.
Okay. So the next one is a funny one. Fuzzy Wuzzy Wizards want a piece of the pizza action.
Yet another contender in the increasingly crowded mascot-driven family pizza parlor cum arcade industry has entered the fray. Fuzzy Wuzzy Wizards is a Florida-based chain that will be best remembered for the lawsuit arising from the owners stiffing the composer of their songs out of the upfront fees they promised.
Sounds good. So how many stores did they actually open?
I only know of the one in Florida. They said that they were also going to that they had agreed to open one up in Pennsylvania, and I can find virtually nothing else about them online. There's a picture of the founder with two of the mascots in front of the store in one of the trade magazines. I found a token, and the picture of the token is linked in the show notes below. And the lawsuit where the composer filed to get the money back that they were owed, that's also linked in the show notes. But other than that, I cannot tell you how many stores they actually manage. So
okay.
Yeah.
Fuzzy Wuzzy Wizards, yeah. Funny name.
It's just bad.
Yes. But let's move on then to Aladdin's Castle. Aladdin's Castle continues aggressive expansion.
Aladdin's Castle, the mall arcade chain, which is a Bally subsidiary, has announced plans to expand its existing 341 locations to 500 by the end of 1983 and is opening an average of 2 new locations per week.
That sounds crazy. I mean, 2 new locations per week.
That is insane.
That is very aggressive.
That is extremely aggressive, and it's really a sign of the perceived still hot demand for video games.
Yeah.
And the sky is the limit attitude at this point. Which, yeah, it's just crazy. It's absolutely freaking crazy.
Agreed. Next piece of news is not everyone is happy with Home Pac-Man.
Coin-op operators are still wary of the effect of home console games on their prospects, as many commentators and trade magazines have mentioned for months now. But a quote from Time magazine in this month's Games People Pay, which is a trade publication, was no doubt typed by someone with a giant grin on their face. Time said that arcade Pac-Man players look at VCS Pac-Man the same way an English professor would look at an illustrated classics version of Paradise Lost.
Yeah, well, it's there's still a world of difference to the arcade games back then.
Yeah, and I mean, it really is. And we've talked how popular VCS Pac-Man was, how it's flying off the shelves in the toy trade publications. Everybody's just like, this is the greatest thing since sliced bread. But the player's perspective on it isn't really coming through. And I think that there are those who are seeing it really as for what it is. It's a very poor man's copy. And for the people who are really enjoying the arcades, you know, it's not going to dissuade them from going to the arcades. But for a lot of kids, especially younger kids or kids who, you know, can't make it to the arcade. Remember, even though the arcades are widespread and there are arcade games in a lot of locations, in the United States, it's not always an issue if you're under driving age and don't have a vehicle of your own. You can't necessarily get to where the machines are.
No,
you know?
That's a problem.
And so having it at home, even if it's not a great version, is still better than Bupkis.
Yes, and we all know that the Arcade Perfect ports came on the C64, of course. Because I remember when I was a kid, I would go to the arcades, I'd play the game, I'll go home, play the same game, and there would be no difference at all. It was beautiful.
Yeah, well, there's a few differences. The C64 version is a little bit slower. You also have the screen is not vertically mounted, but it's a little bit fatter, if you will. But yes, the C64 version was amazing, and I played a ton of it back in the day.
Yes, me too.
Yeah, and also funny, this quote was followed by a Bally Midway marketing executive saying that and those are the guys who released the arcade version, that today's home Pac-Man players would be tomorrow's arcade Pac-Man players. So they're still putting a positive spin on it that, you know, the future, that these people playing it at home are still going to end up in the arcade, that they will want that better experience.
Yeah, I guess that would be true back in that day.
Yeah, I mean, but the problem is they're not going to come back in to play Pac-Man. They're going to want to play something else. True. Maybe. We'll see. It'll be interesting because that development of now I want to play the original thing, but if these games are being switched out so often, is the game even still there after you've played the home port that came out a year later?
Yes. Yeah, true.
It's weird.
It is. So coin-op operators see costs jump.
Vending Times, a trade magazine mainly directed at vending machine operators that also covers video and pinball machines, has released their 1982 census of the industry report. They note that the large growth of video games in 1981 looks set to slow down in 1982 as the cost of new equipment for operators has risen by 33% and that a market saturation of product may be approaching. Remember, everybody, even though this is coming out in 82, obviously the data that they collected was for 81. So they're doing predictions about 82, the year they're in, based on the numbers that they got about 81. The per-game weekly average earnings dropped from a high of $100 in 1980 to just $85 in 1981, reflecting the saturation in the market. New innovations like cassette-based systems to simplify game upgrades were 1981 innovations that may play a factor moving forward. Local opposition in some areas to games and the accompanying restrictive ordinances begin to present a serious problem for operators in 1981. They do, however, note that the introduction of the new look arcades, that's their phrase, aka family-oriented amusement centers, have contributed to the growth in video game placements in a manner difficult to reflect statistically.
Okay. Why would that be difficult to reflect for them? I mean, couldn't they just have the same, treat them as normal arcades and count the number of machines? Or is it because they also earn their money on pizza and other stuff?
Well, it's partially that, but also partially because they're not your traditional operator setup. You know, it's not an operator comes in and has one or two machines in a location. So you're going to have a whole bunch of machines in one place. And even though you have a bunch of machines in one place, they're not all going to be the latest machine. So the operator who's putting the games in the 7-Elevens can't really just put in any old game in the 7-Eleven. But in the family centers, you're going to have 4 or 5 up-to-date machines, but then you're going to fill space with a bunch of lesser or older machines.
Yeah.
And so this is changing the calculus. You know, it changes, you know, how often do you have to update the machines? How often do you have to buy new equipment? All of that changes because you're suddenly extending the life of the equipment in some cases well beyond what you could afford to do as a regular everyday operator.
Okay. And did you pay for every single game you played in those pizza parlors, or did you pay for the entry to the place?
You paid for each individual game.
Okay, so you can still do statistics on that, see how much a single machine was earning them.
Well, yeah, they're definitely counting that, because if something's not earning at all and you have another game available, you're probably going to want to switch it out. And actually, this is something that's going to come up in 2 interviews that I've recently done that will be hopefully up on the Patreon in the next few months with the co-founder and the general manager of the Family Entertainment Center that I used to work at.
Yeah.
And this is actually something that we went into great detail about. That mix of games, you know, the older titles, you know, what was their purpose there, and so on and so forth. So it really is, they're just there for filler for the most part.
Okay.
So they're not really worried about that. And the operators were, you know, they were always making sure that they had at least a good enough mix of the brand new games. I mean, the general manager and the owner would actually take trips to all the big shows, including even once they flew out to the big show in London, just to look at the new equipment so they could then tell their operators, okay, these are the games that we need.
Yeah.
So interesting stuff. Now, this report, this Vending Times Census, it was a real treasure trove of data. A couple of other little finds in there were Flipper Pinball has seen a very steady average income per game since 1978, with the range fluctuating from a low of $44.79 to a high of $48.78 and 80. So basically, that's it. The amount of money going into a pinball table hasn't really changed. It's a fraction of what a video game makes.
Yeah.
But it's very consistent. It's not having those highs and lows. And what was really interesting was pool tables, because they earned about $52 per table per week in 81. But they required minimal maintenance, and operators only averaged 5.1 new or replacement tables per year, as opposed to 33.1 video games per operator per year.
Okay.
So the average operator is buying 33 new games a year.
Yeah.
They're not making twice as much, but they're having to buy 6 times as much.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the prices are going up. As I said, the operators, their new equipment cost has risen by 33%.
So the cost of the machines haven't been calculated into this earnings per week here. That is
this is just the earning. This is coin drop.
Okay.
That's how much is coming in. But
then it's a lot easier to just have a lot of pool tables, it seems.
Pool tables require a lot larger space. You're not going to put a pool table in a 7-Eleven.
Nope, true.
So this is the thing. Video game flippers take a lot of space.
Okay.
You know, it's an extended out machine. A video game cabinet is relatively small. This is also why arcade operators weren't really game operators couldn't really do business at most of these locations before. You know, you didn't put a flipper in a supermarket, but you could put a Pac-Man machine in a supermarket, fit right there between the doors, you know. You know,
sure.
one side is coming in, the other side is going out, and there's a Pac-Man in the middle.
Yeah.
So this is why it opened up a bunch of new opportunities, but the problem is also they were all new opportunities, and nobody really had a way of understanding what are the long-term consequences. There was no track record of earnings like with jukeboxes or pool tables.
Okay.
And they're about to learn that lesson.
Yes. So the next piece of news, we have a state that turns into a retirement home because all the minors are thrown out. Vancouver bans minors.
Not quite. But I love where you're going with it. A law from the 1930s that bans minors from entering minors with an O, not minors.
Yes.
From entering any establishment with coin-operated games has been found to be illegal in Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada. 2 shopkeepers had appealed against the law, which hadn't been enforced for decades. So there was this old law that said, you know, coin-operated games, which in the 1930s was, you know, your gambling or non-skill-based games.
Yeah.
Could only be in places where people under whatever the age was, 21, probably maybe 18, could enter. And nobody had enforced this throughout the 50s, 60s, 70s because, you know, pinball and everything had evolved and nobody really cared. But now when everybody, and this is just the one example I picked out, there were literally 36 laws that I counted up that I could have talked about in this episode. These things are popping up all over North America.
Okay.
Every little town, school district, city, state is looking at some kind of regulation on, you know, how to restrict access to these, you know, video games are going to poison your soul, make you go blind, and make us lose the war or something.
Yes.
So, but this was just the one that I thought was fun because it does connect with all those pinball bans that we've been talking about in the older jumps the last few months.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
But now it's just hitting anything that's coin-operated games.
Exactly. I mean, they're still legal. It's just you have to be 18 to play them, or 21, whatever they're counting as age of maturity here.
Yes. Okay. Okay, so the next piece of news is that Sega goes to court in England.
Sega has sued Alpha Inc., a UK manufacturer of copycat games. The suit revolves around a Frogger clone. Unfortunately, Sega has to contend with the fact that there is no established copyright for video games in the UK yet, a fact that has devastated the country's coin-op market. The court has ruled that Sega will have a right to Alca's sales records if it wins the case, putting operators of infringing games on notice.
So there's no copyright for video games in the UK at this point in time?
Yes.
Okay.
And this is
so they're all playing like clones that they make themselves, or?
Well, this is the fun part. And we talked about this a few months ago at one of the UK trade shows, that one of the companies actually put up these big banners on at their stand saying,
remember that?
There is no copyright for this. You cannot copyright a video game. So unless, you know, somebody's copying the code, which, you know, you'd have to prove that it's the code. No. The video games, you can make a pirated copy, change the name on the front. The rest of the game can be 100% identical. It's perfectly legit.
Yeah.
Because the legal precedent for saying, you know, it's, you know, the copyrighted work is whatever, you know, the software is producing, and look and feel tests and stuff like this. None of this has actually gone to court in England yet, because you don't have any major manufacturers in England yet. And so what has happened in England is that the entire market, not the entire market, they're still selling games, but legitimate game sales have all but collapsed for the big manufacturers. They're not even bothering to show up to some of the trade shows, and Sega is going to try to change that, where they're actually going to court to fight this. And the big question here wasn't whether or not the game was a violation of law, but just this first bit where Sega wanted Alca's list of clients who had bought the machines, the operators. Now, the court said that if Sega wins, it will get that list. It's not going to get the list yet, but if Sega wins, it will get the list. And then they're going to come and they're going to take away all your machines, Mr. Operator. And this is sending a shot across the bow of the operators who have been buying these cheaper pirated games because, well, they're cheaper and there's no law prohibiting it. So why shouldn't they buy the cheaper British-made Frogger as opposed to the more expensive Sega-made Frogger? But if suddenly your investment in these machines could just be taken away from you, that might be the incentive you need to buy the more expensive one. So they're making sure that everybody knows this decision has happened, and if Sega wins and sets the same precedent that's already been set in North America, the next day they're coming for your machines. So it's an important little decision. Ultimately, of course, you will get video games being protected under English law. They will come in line with international copyright and all of this. But it was an interesting development, I thought, especially from a public relations standpoint.
So do you know when the law is actually put down that you can't just copy?
That I don't know. We're going to get to it at some point soon, but we're not there yet.
So the ZX Spectrum is already out, and a lot of Spectrum games and C64 games, by the way, from the UK, from this era, are just blatant rip-offs of arcade games. And I've often wondered why there was no regulation of that.
And it's because of this at this point.
Okay.
There's no way to stop it in the UK. When you look through old issues, and every month I'm looking through computer and video games, which is one of the major magazines in England for 30 years. They're talking about, this game is the VIX Pac-Man, or this is the latest Space Invaders game for the ZX81 or whatever. And they're talking about this as if it's the most natural thing in the world, that obviously everybody and their mother is going to make a copy of this, and they're not even thinking twice about it.
No, the marketing definitely, nobody was scared of making copies, that's for sure.
Oh, yeah, and we're going to see a lot of those, but then we're also going to see the English take a front row role in getting licenses for those arcade games later on, and they will become the ones who are putting out most of the home computer ports of Sega games and Namco games and whatever else in the late 80s and early 90s. So, I mean, the pendulum will swing back. It's just right now it's not there.
Okay. So, moving into consoles, ColecoVision launches.
Coleco, which has already made a name for themselves in electronic handhelds and tabletops, has made the jump to programmables. Using a Z80 processor and a TI graphics chip, their ColecoVision will push the quality of graphics and sound to new heights, something demonstrated with their amazing pack-in, Donkey Kong.
And Donkey Kong on the ColecoVision is most definitely amazing. It's a feat on that machine.
Oh yeah, it's really, really good. I mean, it's not arcade perfect. Donkey Kong's on the wrong side of the screen because there's a whole platform missing. And it doesn't even have all of the levels, does it? Or does it? I can't remember now if one of the levels is missing.
I feel that one of them is missing, but I could be wrong.
But compared with everything else, if you compare it with the Intellivision and the 2600, the VCS, it's a whole new world.
Yeah.
It really was an eye-opening piece of hardware. You can niggle about the controllers being crap.
Yes, and they were.
Yeah, but the fact that the game looked as good as it did was without a doubt true. So.
Yes, definitely did.
But hey, they're not the only game in town.
No. The Atari 5200 is there as well, but it's hit some inventory snack.
Yes. According to the Video Game Update newsletter, Atari's new super game console, the 5200, will only be available in limited quantities until Christmas. The games previewed apparently look great, and the editor is enamored with the new controller that is so responsive and thin it should solve the quote-unquote Atari wrist problem.
I never knew there was an Atari wrist problem, but okay.
Yeah, Atari wrist, it was, people playing for too many hours and their wrists getting injured.
Yes.
It was one of those, fatigue things. And
the Atari joysticks were definitely horrible. I've got one here still, but I use it sometimes just for fun on the Atari 8-bits, but not a good stick.
No.
So
especially since you had
did it have the control pads like the same that they used on the 7800?
No, the 5200 has the non-recentering.
Okay, so still a stick.
It's a stick okay. with a I don't know if it's a full number pad, but it's got a whole bunch of buttons. Okay. It's elongated, so you don't have to hold it like a square brick in your hand, but it's a little bit easier on the palm.
Okay.
But it doesn't recenter.
Okay.
It's crap.
Yes.
It's unplayable.
That sounds
crap.
Bad.
It's terrible. It's absolutely terrible. I'm trying to remember now. I believe it was also.
Yeah, it has the full number pad. I just found an image of it here.
Yeah,
and I tried this one.
It's also analog.
Okay.
If I remember correctly, let's see. Airplane controller kit. Yeah, a yoke and gimbal, an analog joystick.
Okay.
And the problem with that is, of course, we're not talking about games that require an analog stick.
No.
So it just made playing a game like Pac-Man virtually impossible.
Okay.
And all of the major arcade games of the time are going to get ported to it, and they're all going to suck. Or they're going to be almost unplayable. They're not going to suck from a technical standpoint, but they're going to suck from a gameplay standpoint.
Okay. Could you use the old Atari controllers as well?
No.
Okay.
I think these are using a brand new socket. This is a good question. No, it looks like it's a 9-pin. No, it's a lot more than 9 pins.
Okay.
It's a lot more than 9 pins. I'm just looking at the. If you really want a good review of this machine, Angry Video Game Nerd. I know there's a lot of his stuff that needs to be taken with a huge grain of salt, but he does the 5200 justice.
Okay.
Because there is no justice for them. It's bad. And then the case is so huge. It's just this giant glob of plastic, and the back part opens up, and it has a container to hold your cartridges in it.
That's pretty nice.
So, it's useless. It just makes this thing even more awkward. So yeah, the 5200 is going nowhere fast. And yeah, the games previewed, like I said, look amazing, but yeah, this is going nowhere.
Okay. So let's get away from the Atari 5200. Amazon Arcadia debuts at CES.
Tyrome has introduced a new console. Their Tyrome is a rebrand of the Emerson Arcadia 2001, a fairly unremarkable system except for the more than a dozen rebrands it will get. running a Cygnet's 2650 chip CPU, it could be a real contender in power if it had been released in 1978.
That sounds bad.
Oh yeah. I included a link to the a video with the 60 games that made the Arcadia. Oh, it's kind of painful to watch. I mean, it's probably inferior in power and design to the Intellivision, especially when you consider that the Intellivision has had a couple years to work out some of the kinks.
Yeah.
And its biggest claim to fame is a series of sports games that are 3D sports, like 3D soccer and stuff. And what they're trying to do is an isometric field on a system that it actually makes the spectrum scrolling look good.
Okay.
Yeah, it's just terrible on every level. But, hey, the market's hot. You've got this thing going. And the funny thing is it will get a relaunch in Japan in 83 by Bandai, of all people.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Moving on then into what is this next category, mate?
I've changed the colors here. Everybody at home, we always do these notes as a spreadsheet, and I put colors on here. Now we're going into companies making software for home consoles. So this was home consoles, new hardware. Now we're going into the software.
Okay. And the first one here is Games by Apollo goes big on advertising.
Upstart Games by Apollo, which was only founded in October as a subsidiary of National Career Consultants, a company that makes audiovisual equipment for career consultants, has signed Benton & Bowles ad agency with a promised budget of $20 million a year. Atari pushed $18 million in network TV ads in 81 out of $43.4 million industry total.
Okay, so that's a huge budget, even bigger than Atari's.
Yeah, they're basically promising they're going to be advertising more than Atari did the previous year.
Yeah.
And about half as much as the industry as a whole did the previous year.
Okay, so how did that go for them?
How many games by Apollo have you played?
I've never heard about Games by Apollo.
We've mentioned them once already because their very first game was so defective and didn't work because of programming mistakes that they had to recall it.
Okay.
Yeah, Games by Apollo is not going to be around for very long, but they are notable for being one of the very, very first third parties after Activision.
Okay.
And their stuff sucks. Okay.
And speaking of Activision, Activision's earnings are way up.
Activision's first full year of operations were a resounding success. While the first third-party console publisher managed an impressive $744,000 in profits from $6.2 million in revenues for the 9 months of operations in fiscal 1980, that was not a full year. Fiscal 1981 saw a profit of $12.9 million on revenue of $65.9 million.
That's massive. But again, how many months are we talking about?
That's the full year.
Yeah, that's the full year. But in 80, how many months was that?
9 months.
Oh, sorry, 9 months. Well, that is a huge leap then.
Yeah. I mean, it was almost a full year.
Yeah.
They had a Christmas season in there.
Okay.
So this is how big and fast this market is growing.
Yeah.
Now remember, in 1981, they are the only third party on the VCS
and
or
Activision
on the
makes all of the good games.
Well, yeah. Not all of them. I mean, you still have Asteroids and Missile Command.
True. But all of the games that Activision made were good. That's maybe.
They were all technically superior. Whether or not they had the long-term quality to keep playing is another issue entirely. But hey, I mean, it's all good. And one of the big interesting things going into this next year, obviously they've got games like Pitfall coming.
Yeah.
That just premiered at the CES. Curiously enough, one of the video game update newsletter was like, yeah, Pitfall, it didn't give it as high a rating as some other games. I'm just like, okay, you guys don't understand what's about to hit. But
nope.
yeah, it's just crazy. The amount of money that's coming in, this is why everybody else wants in on this market.
Yeah, understandable. And KC Munchkin is back.
While Phillips' appeal to the Supreme Court has still not been accepted for a hearing, the Odyssey 2 mascot has gotten a sequel announced. KC's Crazy Chase will be out in the fall, and we'll see the little furry infringer hunt down a centipede-like creature.
So what is that a copy of then?
Well, it's got a little bit of a hint of centipede, but it's different enough that nobody's going to sue them. So you're actually still moving Casey around the screen.
Yeah.
But it's not an amaze anymore. And there's this centipede, and Casey can just bite off pieces of the centipede. And I think then he also has the little centipede circles behind him. I've honestly never played the game, but
okay.
Yeah.
So other people getting in here. Avalon Hill gets VCS fever.
Venerable board game maker Avalon Hill, which has been in the computer field for a hot minute, as we reported on back in another episode I haven't looked up, but I will put a link to it in the show notes, has announced that they will be making games for the VCS and in television.
So Avalon Hill, give me some of their big board games that I should know.
Dune. The Dune board game.
Okay.
But basically any board game from the 70s or 80s that had 1,000 little pieces in it and a manual that would bore you to tears before you ever got to play, those are the Avalon Hill games.
Okay.
They're these massive war games and strategy games.
Sounds like games made for computers and not the VCS and in television.
Yes, and they've already been semi-failing in the computer business.
Okay.
And when I talked to, the names are failing me today. When I talked with the founder of SSI, I'll put a link to the interview in the show notes. He had originally wanted to publish his games through Avalon Hill, and they didn't want to because they were going to be doing their own. The problem is Avalon Hill starts out trying to convert the board games one-to-one to the computer.
Yeah.
And number one, they're doing these on hardware that honestly can't handle them yet. And second, there's aspects of those games that only work if you're around a table with other people.
Yeah.
And they're too slow if you have to play one-on-one against the computer.
And so
as
the sheer storage you need to represent all of this wouldn't be there on a VCS, would it?
Well, on a VCS, forget about it. There's absolutely nothing you can do on a VCS that's even going to come close to these type of games. The best idea of that is the game on the Intellivision, Utopia, designed by Don Daglow, which basically does what a console game is supposed to do. It turns it essentially into a real-time game.
Yeah.
And so you cannot take that turn-based, very, very detailed game board concept and put it onto a VCS because you don't have the resolution. You don't have it on the Apple II. You're not going to have it on the C64, really. You're going to have to wait until you get to high-end PCs to have the resolution necessary to even get the data from the board onto the screen, let alone everything else, and a menu system to look at inventories and whatnot. But Avalon Hill has started to branch out. They've got all sorts of little action games. There's an ad for their computer games this month where they're doing these 2-packs, with a boxing game and a board game or whatever in one package. Essentially, they're rudderless. They don't have a theme. They don't have anything. They're just basically publishing software. And they're not going to be in the business for very much longer.
Nope, like so many other companies. Exactly. More new companies enter the scene.
The Video Game Update newsletter reports on some of the new companies that displayed games at CES. Here's just a smattering. We have Spectravision with 2, as they said, quote, very simple titles. Gangster Alley and Planet Patrol, basically 2 shooter games. We've got VidTech, no real news about what they're doing. Telesys, their big claim to fame is a game called Fast Foods, just a maze chase nonsense. Fox Games, this is the movie studio.
Okay.
They were showing 4 games. If you want to hear more about how that came about and went down, my interview with the co-founder of Sirius Software, they were the ones providing those games, and basically they lost their shirts on the deal. I'll put a link in the show notes. And then Data Age, they've got 5 games coming down the pipeline. So you can really see this deluge of companies, just jumping in and making whatever they can throw together quickly. And let's not forget how difficult it is to program an Atari 2600. This is not, just write your C code and throw it on there. To make it work, you're going to have to get all the timings of the CPU and the beam right and everything else just to get anything on the display. Yeah. So the number of people who actually know how to do this are not sufficient to actually make all of these games functional.
Yeah. Must be quite hard.
Oh, yeah.
So sorry for our listeners for all the noise, but I'm sweating like a pig here. It's so hot, so I'm making noises when I move around on my chair.
Oh, come on. Everybody knows here the sexy one is Maz.
Oh, yes, true.
There's somebody out there right now who's been like, I've been waiting for the June and July episodes.
No, nobody else.
Oh, squeak, man. Squeak. Squeak like a little piggy. Yeah.
Okay. Moving on quickly. Spielberg goes Atari.
Atari has nabbed the rights to make games based on Steven Spielberg blockbusters like Raiders of the Lost Ark and the summer's biggest hit, E.T.
Yes, we all know how that's going to go.
Oh, yeah, this is going to go really, really good.
Yes.
This is, the history behind this has been documented in other places, but essentially the common tale is that the head of Warner Brothers that owns Atari is really just out to get Steven Spielberg to come and make movies at Warner Brothers.
Okay.
Because Raiders of the Lost Ark was Paramount, E.T. was Universal, and he wants him to come to Warner Brothers.
Okay.
And so he makes this ludicrous offer, pays a ton of money for the video game rights, promises they'll be in stores by Christmas, which obviously means that they're going to have to be done in no time flat.
Yes. Yeah.
Have you ever seen the TV show Code Monkeys?
Nope, never.
Oh! You need to watch Code Monkeys. It's an animated sitcom set in a video game company in the 80s.
Okay.
And it's brilliant. It's absolutely brilliant. And they have an entire episode about the company just bought the rights to E.T. But they only there's 2 guys who are supposed to be working on it, and one of them is a huge Spielberg fan, and the other one is just this lazy bum who never does anything. And the guy who gets the ticket to go see the movie is the lazy bum, and he decides then to scalp the ticket because it's the hottest ticket in town, and instead goes off and drinks all night and then decides to tell his friend what the movie was about and has nothing to do with it. And they basically end up creating E.T. It's great. It's absolutely awesome. Code Monkeys. If you guys haven't watched it, it's one of my favorite shows of the last 20 years. I'll put a link in the show notes. Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
Now,
sticking with Atari announces Sword Quest Scavenger Hunt.
The most lavish contest in gaming history has been announced by Atari. Tens of thousands of dollars in precious stones will be given to those that find the hidden treasures hinted at by completing the Sword Quest series of games: Earth World, Fire World, Water World, and Air World.
So you get what exactly? You need to complete those games and you get parts of a code word, or?
Yeah, so there's going to be an explanation at the end of the game, and you send that in, and then amongst the correct entrants, they will then choose the winner, and there's going to be these precious gemstones put into a chalice or a sword, and it basically is just this absolutely, how can we distinguish ourselves from all the weird third parties out there? and it's excess upon excess. Okay. And there's going to be a comic book series to go along with the deep story in this VCS game. And it's just, it's nuts. They're never going to finish the games. There's going to be rumors running around for years about how Jack Tramiel took the final prizes and stuff, which is also obviously nonsense. And it's just crazy.
Okay. Moving on then. Video game price war feared.
Toy industry trade magazine Playthings has a monthly feature where toy retailers from around the country give a snapshot look at the goings-on in their areas. Often there are minor differences based on regional weather or distribution. The Boston report talks about the fears of local toy men, that's what they call each other in the industry, that a price war may be brewing in the video game market. Customers are price shopping and many popular items are being discounted, with some VCS games going for as little as $10.97, and even the crown jewel Pac-Man being sold for under $30 in some places.
So before this, did they have price fixing, which of course is illegal?
No, there's no price fixing. Now, you can set a suggested retail price. In books, they print the price right on the cover. You don't have to necessarily sell it at that price, but, and this is the first time when the prices have dipped this low for a cartridge game. Remember, these things cost money to manufacture. They cost money to market. The fact that there's a VCS game being sold for $10.97 is unheard of. It's never happened before.
So what would that be in today's money, in euros, like 15, 20 euros?
Always difficult. You could say you could triple it. So let's say $30.
Okay.
Not really a one-to-one equivalent because inflation rates count things like food and stuff in them, and gasoline, which have gone up a lot more than entertainment products.
Yeah.
So, if you're talking about Pac-Man, which is a AAA title, selling normally for, let's say, $40 or $50, that would be the equivalent of a AAA game nowadays selling for $40 or $50 or $60 actually.
Okay.
Is this a AAA game in the U.S. is usually going for $50 to $60. So it has the inflation on a AAA title hasn't been that great.
Okay.
The market's gotten bigger, blah blah blah. So if you're able to buy a brand new game for a third, now we're dealing with a problem.
Yeah.
And at this point, the idea of AAA versus non-AAA doesn't really exist because we don't have third parties.
No.
Every game from Atari is supposed to be a great game. Every game from Mattel for the Intellivision is supposed to be a great game. There's somewhat better than others, but you're not expecting real stinkers. This idea of a low quality game coming out is unprecedented because up until now, third party meant Activision, and like you just said, Activision.
Yeah, they did good stuff.
Game.
Yeah.
Well, now we're getting the games from the people who up Games by Apollo, where you put it in, it may not actually sync up with your TV resolution. Minor technicality, And so this is the first real indicator I've seen, and I read through these little columns from the locals in every one of these issues. It takes a long time, but it's really interesting to see these little anecdotes of things that these local toy sellers are seeing. And this is also before everything has just become Walmart and Toys R Us.
Yeah.
And Toys R Us doesn't exist anymore, so it's just Walmart or Target. This is when most of the toy stores are still these small mom and pop shops. And there's a lot more flexibility on the decisions that people can make. Now, one little side note here, and we kind of mentioned it last week with Wouter and the 20-year jump, or mentioned the property, but the San Francisco report is the first to mention a new toy line called Masters of the Universe, which is already grabbing a lot of attention even before the TV ads begin. And as far as I can understand it, San Francisco is the test market for Masters of the Universe for He-Man.
Okay. So the TV show hasn't launched yet?
The TV show won't launch until 83.
Okay.
But there's going to be a factor in the crash where when electronic handheld games crashed a year or so ago, 2 years ago, really. The toy sellers still stuck with the product because there really wasn't another good boys product out there. Okay. There wasn't something that you could replace them with in that category. Well, in 81 we got G.I. Joe, but it hasn't really kicked off yet because they had a comic book, but they don't have a TV show yet. They won't get that until I think late 83, early 84. They don't have, and there's no other big series. Occasionally toys based off of a movie, but that's it. So Star Wars is the only replacement, really. Motu is going to change all of that.
So they're looking for new dolls for boys, toys to make?
Well, it's just something the boys can buy that's not going to cost the toy retailer the investment.
Yeah, and something that they've been making for years, just for the girls instead. I mean,
the girls
same
have
machines, I guess, to produce it on.
Yeah, that, and also you have to remember from a retailer standpoint, the retailer is going to take risk. One of the big problems with the crash is going to be that at the end of Christmas, product that doesn't sell, traditionally a chunk of it can get given back to the toy manufacturer for credit. When Games by Apollo ceases to do business, when VidTech ceases to be, etc.,
they won't buy back their stock.
They won't buy back that stock. And that was expensive stock. That was a $50 game or a $40 game that you bought for $20. You're out a lot of money. Castle Grayskull is retailing for $24.99.
Yeah.
So they maybe paid $12 for it. So a Castle Grayskull that doesn't sell, you're out $12. But it is going to sell, and it's going to keep selling.
Yeah.
And so the motivation for the toy retailer to eat up stock and eat up the amount of money that they have a limited amount of money to buy inventory every year. They're going to allocate it to the burgeoning action figure market in 83.
Yeah.
To the detriment of video games.
Yes, of course.
So this is why I thought this first mention of Masters of the Universe was kind of important to mention as well.
Yeah. But getting back to the Odyssey, Mattel loses suit over Odyssey patents.
A federal judge has determined that Mattel's Intellivision violated Philips's patents first secured by Sanders Associates for the Magnavox Odyssey. Not Odyssey 2, the original Magnavox. Mattel has said they will appeal.
Okay. So I'm guessing we'll be picking this up later on then?
No, not really. As far as I don't know if the appeal actually goes through. They end up paying, like everybody else.
Okay.
Well, everybody except for Activision.
Yeah.
And by the time Activision has to pay, that's going to be the straw that breaks the Activision back and why Bobby Kotick gets to take it over.
Okay.
Yeah. So everybody is going to end up paying at some point.
Yes. Okay. So moving into home computers, I guess?
Yes.
Yes. The Dragon 32 is coming.
Dragon Data has promised to deliver the most British computer yet, the Dragon 32, using a UK-made Motorola 6809 and 32K of memory for just £200.
I've actually never used the Dragon 32.
Me neither. And the 6809 chip, have you ever heard of that one?
No.
Okay. I went down a rabbit hole on this chip because it is an interesting, weird, and pointless creation. So just real brief. I know that the show is going long, but this was interesting enough it deserved mention. So originally Motorola makes the 6800, and that was their 8-bit CPU. Famously, Chuck Peddle and a group of other engineers leave Motorola. They take apart the 6800 and they make a cost-reduced version, which becomes the 6502, which is what powers the VCS and the VIC-20 and so many other machines. Well, Motorola doesn't want to take that line down. The 6800 is an overly complex chip where different parts of the chip are using different voltages. So there's all these adapters in between the voltages, and this is why it costs so much money to make a 6800. So it's like at the time the 6800 is selling for $120, the 6502 is selling for $25. Things like that. So they decide they're going to do a cost-reduced, enhanced, more powerful version of the 6800 called the 6809. And it's still going to be backwards compatible, and it's going to be faster. So the 6809 comes out the same year as the 68000, the 16-bit chip.
Yeah.
And it was launched because their internal market research told them that a lot of people still wanted to stick with 8-bit processors. So they're coming out a couple years after the 6502. They're coming out at the same time as the much more powerful, much more expensive 68000. Now with a chip that is 1.5 times as fast as the 6502 in certain processes, but still costs more than 6502 because that one is just the price just keeps dropping. But it is more powerful. So if you don't want to go full 16-bit, but you want a more powerful 8-bit processor, this becomes your alternative. And so the Dragon 32 is using it. But they're really only using it because it's the only chip, that 8-bit chip that I guess is being manufactured in the UK at this point.
Yeah.
The Vectrex uses a 6809.
Okay.
A bunch of arcade cabinets. Williams jumped on the 6809, so Robotron is running a 6809. And it's just this weird little thing that never really takes off because the Motorola clients who can actually afford it just jump to the 68,000, and for everybody where price is really an issue, they just stick with the 6502 because it's so omnipresent at this point. So yeah, but yes, I also have never used a Dragon 32, but from everything I've seen, I haven't missed anything.
No, that's my take on it as well. So John Freeman and Ann Westfall leave automated simulations.
Way back on our very first episode for the November 1978 jump, we talked about the founding of automated simulations, better known later on as epics. Well, co-founder John Freeman and senior software engineer Ann Westfall have left to form Freefall Associates, an independent design studio.
So epics as in the guys making the summer games, winter games, all the game series? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, so it starts out as automated simulations. Gateway to AppShy is one of their first big products. They're basically, I've spoken with the guy who turns automated simulations around. And I am really, really bad with my names tonight. I'll put a link in the show notes. And his description of the other co-founder is, hey, the guy was a geek. So automated simulations is mainly doing RPGs and strategy games.
Yeah.
And epics when epics starts off as their subline of more actiony games. And then I don't know at what point they add the slogan, action games for the thinking man, when they have the logo, with the thinker holding a joystick.
Yeah.
But, that's where you get games like Pit Stop and Summer Games and Impossible Mission. All the classic Epix games come out of that later period after the original founders are out.
And those are the games I know about.
Exactly, because you weren't playing on a Trash 80.
No.
Which is where those games were originally functioning. I mean, the original version of Gateway to Apshai, you quite literally said how many feet you wanted to move the character, and he would just jump that many feet. Didn't matter if there was a trap in the middle or anything like that, whereas the later C64 adaptations of the game completely changed that into a more action RPG type of game mechanic.
Yeah.
So these guys, their time was over. Now they're still going to do a couple of game designs for automated simulation / Epic, but yeah, they're not going to be the most well-known members of this whole thing. The big thing with them is that they're going to get snapped up by EA, and John Freeman and Westfall and Paul Reich the third are going to be the creators of a little game called Archon.
Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting.
And that's going to be their big claim to fame.
Yeah. So, next piece of news is that Sinclair loses more key staff.
Oh, yeah. Richard Altwasser, key designer of the Spectrum hardware, and Stephen Vickers, writer of the systems manual, have left Sinclair to form an as-of-yet unnamed new company.
And what will the name be?
Jupiter Ace.
Mm-hmm.
And, that's the name of the computer. I can't remember what the company name was.
Okay.
But they're going to release a computer called the Jupiter Ace, which is going to be a low-spec Z80 machine with a chiclet keyboard, very similar to the Speccy.
Yeah.
But from its capabilities, actually a little bit more akin to the ZX81.
Okay.
And it almost smacks very much of something similar. What was that follow-up to the Spectrum? That computer that tried to keep the 8-bit thing alive in the early 90s.
Oh, yes, I can see there a little logo.
Yeah, the little robot.
Yes, exactly. Thing. I forget right now.
Yeah,
that's going to come to me in a minute.
Exactly. It's very much along that line of, there's still people who want that low-end machine. They don't need that high-tech Spectrum thing. Here, let us give you that. And no. Jupiter Ace is going to basically vanish almost overnight. Interesting, though, is that Altwasser's time with the Speccy isn't over yet, because he's going to be hired by Amstrad.
Yeah.
And he's going to become the chief of tech when they buy the Speccy. So he's actually going to be the guy leading the charge to design those later Spectrums that Amstrad brings out, the ones with integrated tape drives and stuff.
Yeah. So I think the Plus 2, there's an Amstrad version of that. That's the one I have. The gray one. It's a good one.
Yeah, and the Plus 3 later on.
Yes, and the Plus 3, of course, yeah.
Yeah, was the Plus 2 also released as a Sinclair model, or was
I'm
that
sure
just
it was. I think there's a black model that's a Sinclair model, and then there's the gray one that is released by Amstrad. I may be wrong, though. I'm not an expert on the spec.
Yeah, I always thought the 128K was the Sinclair model, but the Plus 2 was the Amstrad, because it added the drive, the tape deck.
Yes, I think you're right.
Yeah, that's how I have it stored in the back of my head, but I could also be wrong. Please let us know. Remember, everybody, you can send us an email at videogamenewsroomtimemachine@gmail.com. Links in the show notes.
Yes,
okay,
please do so.
Let's keep moving.
Wall Street downgrades Apple's future.
Apple stock has dropped 2.5.
To about half.
Oh, I wrote it. I can't read it. So Apple stock has dropped about.
Get away.
No
W. No W.
No W. That's what it is. Apple stock has dropped to about half of its initial debut price as it struggles to stay ahead of its competition. The introduction of the IBM PC and dismal reception of the Apple III have left it reliant on the success of its next two products, the Lisa and the Macintosh.
Yes, Apple III is definitely something most people wouldn't even have heard about. So that was no success. But the Lisa and the Macintosh, that's where it's at, isn't it?
Well, the Lisa is going to be an utter catastrophe.
Yes.
The Macintosh is not going to make money for the next 7 years. So in many ways, no, Apple is just going to limp along on trying to keep the Apple II on life support.
Yes, that's true.
Yeah, it's so very sad. But, this is Apple is now running into the problem that Commodore is going to eat their lunch at the low end of the spectrum. And IBM is going to be the only option for people who want to do spreadsheets, which was the thing you bought an Apple for because VisiCalc was first released on it.
Yes. True.
Yeah. But hey, enough people are going to be hardcore Mac heads, even through the bad Power PC days, that it won't matter because they'll still be able to fleece them. Enough of them.
Yes, to stay alive. And these days they have so much money that they don't know what to do with it. So
exactly,
it's all good.
You gotta love offshore tax dodges known as Ireland.
Yes.
Okay.
Atari gets big order from Dade County.
In the continuing battle for school classroom dominance, Atari continues to chip away at Apple's lead. Their latest accomplishment, an order for 426 Atari 800 computers from the Dade County School Board in Florida, the largest order of its kind so far, according to Atari.
So Atari was giving them special treatment like Apple were in the beginning?
Oh, yeah. I mean, both of the companies are really, selling at cost or below cost. There was an interview on the Atari 8-Bit podcast with one of the ladies who was in charge of this program, and they were making a lot of inroads. The Atari 8-Bit computers are really great for learning how to program, especially because they don't have all the weird color stuff that Apple does. So you can get, more appealing results on screen and stuff.
Yeah, okay.
And they're just as sturdy, especially if you're doing an 800. So they were really trying to go for this market. Obviously, once Atari collapses, this program immediately gets shut down. She talked about how, the Tremels came in and they just, it was like, sorry, you're gone. That's it. And she was quite understanding. She was like, the company had lost too much money.
Yeah.
But they're definitely chipping away at their lead at this point, but the crash is going to just cost them too much.
Okay. So moving on, we have some news from your friend Randall. Randall Kotvich muses on Laserdisc.
Softside editor and friend of the show, Randall Kotwitz, muses this month in his editorial about the potential of Laserdisc mass storage to make the massive data inputs of modern life usable should a microprocessor be coupled with the devices, a far more practical application of the technology than creative computing seems obsessed about.
So he's actually thinking about using it as storage and not still a video disc that you can show little clips from.
Exactly. Okay. There's going to be a link in the show notes to his editorial. It's only one page. I highly recommend reading it because it really does confront a lot of the issues that we have today of, you've got all these inputs from different sources. He talks about advertising, television, radio, newspapers, and how already at that time it's becoming more and more difficult for a person to be able to sift through that knowledge, to do something usable with it, to be able to pull up the knowledge when you want to use it.
Yes.
And he sees the mass media storage of a Laserdisc, not for images and stuff, but for raw data, as a possible solution. This idea of aggregating it or searchable databases of big knowledge. And that's where he's looking And it's an interesting contrast between him, a guy who isn't really a programmer. He's not a programmer. He's just a guy who was hired at this magazine. And he's looking at technology from a more practical standpoint, whereas the guys at Creative Computing who did the adventure game that you played a few months back.
Roller Coaster.
Yeah, Roller Coaster, where they're using the Laserdisc, to pull up cutscenes in a bog standard text adventure. They're looking at it as a programming challenge to be solved at the moment. As opposed to, what is the practical implication for an everyday person, not a programmer? And I think that it is a phenomenal contrast. And it's a theme that we've talked about on the show several times, this transition from the early computer users of the 70s who had to be programmers to do anything with the machine.
Yeah.
To this new generation of computer users who don't have to program, who can buy fully functional and versatile off-the-shelf programs like VisiCalc and never actually have to touch code to get the advantages of computing. And Randall is that new type of editor. He's got, and again, everybody go check out my interview with him. It really was ahead of his time at this moment.
Yeah, and it's a great interview. You really should listen to it, definitely.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, moving on, we get to, what's this category?
This category is now computers and games in the eye of the general public.
Yes, and I'll just like an update here on the background noise. That was an actual helicopter that just flew over me this time. So.
Oh wow!
Yeah.
Cool.
Not sure what's going on tonight. So Tron flops with both critics and analysts.
Disney stock dropped by 5% after an early screening of Tron for both critics and stock analysts. Some stock analysts recommended selling the stock based on their poor reviews of the film, which is seen as an attempt by Disney to regain its standing as a fantasy film powerhouse. Disney countered by saying that the overwhelming response has been positive, and they expect the $20 million movie to produce $400 million in sales of tickets and merchandise.
And do you know how much it actually made then?
I don't have actual numbers for how much it made. I know that the U.S. box office was only $33 million.
Okay.
So there's no way on God's green earth it even got close to 400.
No.
If it hit 100 with all the merchandising deals, and I'm not talking revenue, but I'm talking income, because, I mean, obviously they sell a lot of these licenses for T-shirts and stuff, and if the T-shirts don't sell, they don't care because they just got paid an upfront fee for it to begin.
Yeah.
But I mean, the action figures are not really going to sell all that well. All the ancillary products are not going to sell all that well. It's going to disappear from theaters relatively quickly. It was supposed to come out in June, but because the movie wasn't ready yet, it got delayed until July. And unfortunately, E.T. is still filling movie theaters. E.T. came out months earlier. Rocky 3 is still pretty big. Conan is starting to waver, but that was also in theaters. Sword and the Sorcerer is this really, I mean, if you look at it nowadays, it's this horrible sword and sorcery, literally, movie. You know, it's Conan type of stuff, but it's just over the top nonsense.
Okay.
And it was this really low budget film that just made a fortune that year. Best Little Whorehouse in Texas, a musical with Burt Reynolds and Dolly Parton, is actually going to come out the same week as Tron or a week after Tron, and that's also going to eat into the box office. And, of course, there's the resurgent old Disney in the form of Don Bluth's The Secret of Nim. And this was basically, and this is how it was really portrayed in a lot of the newspaper articles, this contrast between these two movies coming out the same month. Tron is supposed to be the new Disney. You know, what would Walt Disney really do in the 80s with new technology and stuff? He would do Tron, and Don Bluth is trying to keep the old hand-drawn animation and super beautiful stuff going, and that's The Secret of NIMH. And unfortunately, both of them suffer from very, very poor story and pacing.
Okay.
And so neither one of them is going to do all that well at the box office. But, you know, it's an interesting counterpoint at this moment. But yeah, E.T. is just sucking the oxygen out of everything at this point.
Okay. So I've actually never seen either Tron or The Secret of NIMH.
Okay. Secret of NIMH you just have to see because it is some of the most gorgeous 2D animation you will ever see in your life. It is just lavish. It's gorgeous. It has some funny moments, but as a overall story, it just doesn't work. I loved it as a kid. Saw it in the theater, saw Tron in the theater, saw E.T. in the theater. For some reason, didn't get to see Conan in the theater. Can't imagine why.
I can.
I mean, granted, at this point in time, I'm 5 years old. I'm 5 years old. I haven't turned 6 yet at this point. But I do end up watching Tron and Secret of NIMH. And and did watch Best Little Whorehouse in Texas like a year or so later when it came on cable. Probably shouldn't have watched that, but so, and also, and the links are in the show notes, the New York Times review for Tron, it's harsh. It pulls no punches. But dude, we could do like a movie commentary for Tron. I think that would actually be something worth doing because and I can't overstate this. Every magazine this month, all the computer magazines, and this month and last month, Tron is the biggest story there is. Everybody is hoping that Tron is going to legitimize video games in the eyes of the masses. This is, our moment as gamers to shine, or arcaders, as some of the magazines are calling video game players. This is going mainstream. This is how big we now are. Disney is making this multi-million-dollar movie with all the new computer effects in it and stuff. We are unstoppable, and we're going to take pop culture by storm. And it's not going to happen.
Nah, but later on. Just wait.
Yeah, Tron Legacy, that's the one. That'll do it. No. But
it's a good soundtrack, though.
Excellent, yeah. I still enjoyed the movie, but oh well.
So, arcades eat into Mad magazine numbers.
The venerable satire magazine has claimed that its circulation has dropped sharply due to its young readers spending their money in the arcades instead of the newsstand.
So it's a good thing that they release Spy vs. Spy as a game later on then.
Very much so. Now, Mad Magazine's numbers have been dropping since the early 70s. Watergate was like the high point of the magazine. And ever since then, they've been steadily dropping, and they're going to keep dropping throughout the 80s and 90s. But yeah, there is a pretty decent argument to be made that the rise of the arcade really ate into Mad Magazine. I mean, which was maybe a 50-cent publication at the time. That was 2 rounds of Pac-Man. So it was going to be one of those things where kids were going to do a trade-off, and they were going to decide on the arcade as opposed to Alfred E. Newman.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so almost there, mates. Video games and cable TV erode broadcast audience.
Our final story for the day. The 3 commercial broadcast networks in the USA, ABC, NBC, and CBS, are all hiking their ad prices going into the new season despite recessionary fears and losing up to 5% of their viewership, especially among teenagers, to video games and cable TV. The explanation seemed to be that marketers are desperate to hold on to market share in the down economy, and the new, more lax regulatory environment under the Reagan administration is opening up avenues to longer ad breaks and less fear of retaliation.
Okay.
Yeah, so, I mean, part of this story is just, the ads are getting more expensive even though less people are viewing. But this fact that they're calculating that overall they're losing about 5% of the viewership to cable TV and video games. Yeah. And especially among teenagers. They don't give an exact number in the New York Times article for the teenagers, but if you got 5% overall, and cable TV is not that widespread yet in 1982 in the U.S., you've got to be losing a large percentage of the teenagers to playing video games on their TVs. And so this was an interesting idea, an interesting sign of the real world impact on other media. And I mean, everybody was thinking Tron was going to make video games a respectable or at least acknowledge the importance of video games. I think this does a lot more to do that than anything else.
Okay. Yeah. So people playing their VCSs instead of watching TV.
Exactly.
Makes sense.
Why watch a TV show where you don't get to determine how it ends, or play a game where you do?
Yeah. Makes total sense, mate.
Okay, we don't have a company dying yet, but we're watching a lot of almost stillbirths, so that's good.
Yes.
Mads, what is the word of the episode?
So I was thinking Pac-Man, because so many of our stories have been revolving around Pac-Man or mentioning Pac-Man in some way, and I played a game that reminded me a lot about Pac-Man, so Pac-Man it is.
Pac-Man it is. It works for me. The man of the hour. Okay, Mads, this was a very long episode. I thank you very much for coming in and helping out on this one.
No worries. Sorry about all the background noise.
No problem. Tell the nice listeners at home where they can catch you.
They can find me on Retro Asylum, talking about all stuff retro, and on the Playthrough podcast, where we talk about, middle-aged games in a more book club form, when multiple episodes just to get through a single game, discussing it really in depth. So if that's your thing, check me out there.
Excellent. Guys, as always, follow us on the Twitter, and if you can, help us out on Patreon. $1 a month gets you access to all the bonuses, and that's all I got to say today. So everybody, have fun.
Bye.